A warm welcome to everyone. Myself, Besty Boves, the volunteer of shiviforensics. Today, I'm going to take a small introduction on the topic fingerprint science. Over the several thousand years of man existence, there have been so many stories told and retold about these inescapable marks. On the palm side of each person's hand and the soles of each person's feet, there is a prominent skin feature which is single for every person in the world. These features presented in the friction skin, which leaves us some impression when it is contact with an object. These impressions are known as fingerprint. As the time evolves, so many researchers and pioneers contribute the development of the outline. What follow is an overview of timeline of significant development as well as the individual contribution to the development of fingerprint science. The evolution starts us in China from BC 200. They suggested that they uses handprint as an evidence. In AD 14th century, a Persian book includes us that they also uses fingerprint as an identification purpose. The history moves us on, and in 1888, Francis Galton began his observation of the fingerprint. In 1897, Hank and Bose primarily developed the Henry system of fingerprint classification. And in 1901, the New Scotland uses this Henry system of classification. In 1902, US also uses this classification, and in 1918, Edmund Lockhart wrote that if the 12 points of the Galton details were same between two fingerprints, it would be sufficient as a positive identification. The pioneer in Indian history of fingerprint is Harshal. In 1877, he put his idea into practice but didn't succeed. So, after in 1891, Edwin Richard Henry, who avoided the wrong identification, and he approaches the government to replace the anthropometric data by fingerprint for the identification. So the government agreed it, and the first fingerprint bureau in the world was officially opened at Calcutta in July 1897. The use of fingerprint began to develop and establish. So we need to understand the terminologies which is associated with the fingerprint. So let's start with the definition. What is fingerprint? We know that fingerprints are the natural, unique patterns formed by frictions on the epidermal ridges and furrows, which is appears on the pads of fingers and thumbs. Also, there are so many historical terms which is associated with the fingerprint. Some of them are dactylograms, dactyloscopy, dactylography. Dactylograms is which is also known as fingerprint. Dactylography means is a Greek term which means a scientific study of fingerprint. Here I included the cross section of our skin to understand how the fingerprint are developed during our fetal stage. So, the epidermis, that is the outer skin which bears the sweat pores, is connected to the inner skin known as dermis. During our fetal life, the individual ridge units start to develop and grow randomly. As they grow, they start fusing together also. About the 4th month of the fetal stage, the differentiation begins, and the 7th month, the ridge pattern is fully developed. Once the ridge pattern is fully developed, it doesn't change or it never changes. If any injuries such as burns or abrasions or cuts, which doesn't affect any of the ridge characteristics or ridge pattern. The three fundamental principles of fingerprint are persistency, individuality, and variety. Persistency means it remains constant throughout our life. Individuality means a fingerprint is an individual characteristic and no two fingers are found to be identical. Variety means it exhibits a variety of rich characteristics. While we talk about the anatomy of the fingerprint, we know that each fingerprint consists of a set of ridges with various sizes and shapes. The lines on your fingerprints are known as ridges, and the space in between are known as grooves. The different types of ridge characteristics are bifurcation, ending ridge, dot, short ridge, enclosure, trifurcation, etc. All them are included in the figure. You can understand by the figures itself. By these characteristics of the ridges, fingerprints are of three major patterns: the loop, the arch, and the whorl pattern. The ridges that have some curves and change in direction and it form a triangular intersection known as delta. If according to the delta, we can conclude that if there is no delta, then it can be arch pattern, or if have one delta, it can be loop, or it has two delta, it can be whorl pattern. The three major patterns have been subdivided into total of 8 patterns. The arches is subdivided into plain arch and tendon arch. The loops is subdivided into ulnar loop and radial loop. The whorl pattern is divided into plain whorl, double loop, central pocket loop or accidental loop. The ridges of the finger run continuously from one side to the other side makes us no turn back is known as arch pattern. About 5% of the fingerprint pattern must be arches. Arches can be subdivided into plain arch and tendon arch. Almost loop pattern is the most common pattern and about 60 to 65% of the fingerprint patterns must be loop. They are subdivided into ulnar loop and radial loop. Whorl pattern is a type of pattern in which at least two deltas are presented with a recurve in front of each. They are subdivided into four groups as plain loop, double loop, which is also known as lateral loops, central pocket loop, and accidental loop. According to how we get the fingerprints are classified into three types: patent prints, plastic prints, and latent prints. Latent prints are invisible to our naked eyes, so it can be developed by some methods. Plastic prints are the visible patterns which present on the soft surface. Also, the patent prints are also visible, which is present on the smooth surfaces. About the classification, while we studied the evolution, we pointed about Henry, one of the first and certainly the most noted classification system was named by Edward Henry. This identification system originally developed and implemented with four parts: primary classification, secondary classification, subsecondary classification, and final. Right now, the current components includes primary classification, secondary classification, subsecondary classification, final, major, and key. In primary classification, only word patterns are considered and 10 fingers are assigned with some numbers. But in secondary classification, capital letters are indicating the pattern of the index fingers. But in case of the subsecondary classification, values of counts and traces of loops and whorls of the index, middle, and ring fingers are considered. In cases of the major, the ridge count or trace value of the thumbs is taken. In cases of final, ridge count of loops appear on the little finger is taken. The key is obtained by counting the ridges of the first loop appearing on the fingerprint. Like every princess, fingerprint also affected by some factors like age, occupational condition, medical condition, or the transversal conditions, or the environmental factors like temperature, humidity, handling, etc. We study about different types of fingerprint like latent print, patent print, and plastic print. So latent prints are the invisible prints which can be developed by different methods. We can develop it by physical method or chemical method. If we are developing the latent print by physical method, we use some powders, maybe some powders like gray and black powder or fluorescent powder, magnetic powder, or we can do the iodine fuming method also. If you are developing the latent print by chemical method, you can use neem hydrogen, luminol, or amido black, etc. After developing a fingerprint, we need to collect the fingerprint, lifted the fingerprint, also preserve this fingerprint. So for this purpose, there is a 4 steps which is included over here. Step 1 is locating the fingerprint. Step 2 is photography taken for this fingerprint. Step 3 is lifting the fingerprint. And step 4 is comparing the fingerprint. Taking a good quality fingerprint from a known source can be used at a time later for various purposes. So, recording of the fingerprint is a useful method and it can be done by different methods like inking plate, card holder, printers ink, D-rollers, fingerprint cards. Fingerprint cards is also known as 10 print cards. So, I'm going to take a short note on the fingerprint card because the most common using method is fingerprint card. Here, there are 2 types of impressions are taken. First one is rolled impression. Second one is plain impression. Roll impressions are the impressions which are taken the upper part of this print. The 10 finger impressions are taken separately and rolled. This is known as roll impression. In the lower impressions, here we take the 4 fingers of each hands are taken separated and then the thumbs are separately printed. These impressions are known as plain impression. In 1999, the FBI implemented a new system called Autonomous Fingerprint Identification System, mainly known as AFIS. It is a database of fingerprint which is taken from the arrested person and unknown fingerprints found at the crime scenes. If the investigation officer enter the known and unknown prints, it identifies the minutiae and the investigator makes the last decision on a match. So I hope you all understand about this fingerprint, the definition, the classification, also the different types of this fingerprint, and then how we can develop a fingerprint, lifted a fingerprint, collection methods, also how we can preserve this fingerprint for various purposes. So I hope you all understand and thank you.